Okay, so to start us off, though, I am going to take us way back to that year 2000. Does anybody remember this year? So what this year was the height of the Oprah Winfrey Show, actually. I want to draw our attention to the Oprah Winfrey Show. See, there was a story around that time that went viral. And I don't remember even if viral was a thing. Does anybody know, was viral a thing in 2000? Did we use that phrase? I'm not sure. But anyway, this story was about a marriage, a relationship in which there was a woman who had complete control in her marriage. She was striving to have complete control over her husband. So much so that she actually created a notebook of rules for him. It gets better. These are rules that she required him to follow and perfect, that she wanted about him and about their relationship. And until he did that, she was not willing to have kids with him. And the list was actually quite ridiculously exhaustive, which is probably the reason the story got so much traction, right? And so there was things on there like she corrected the way she had a specific way he had to comb his hair, specific ways of what he could eat, what he couldn't eat. I believe he could only have 2 sodas a day. She changed the way he held his fork. At one point, I think there's this one rule that I thought was amazing that says, never give yourself anything without asking me what I want first. There's this one, he folded all the laundry, but there was a way he had to fold the laundry. So his jeans were to fold once, but her jeans he was to fold 3 times with the label on the outside. And this is absurd on a lot of levels. And I'm sure we hear this and we think that this is absurd. Maybe some of us hear it and we're feeling a bit of a sense of relief, though, about our own life. But the truth is, all of us have this struggle in our own way. All of us wrestle with this battle of control, and we may not play it out obsessively. I would argue probably none of us play it out as obsessively as we see this woman doing with these obsessive tendencies. But what I want to say is perhaps we would be better off if we did. Because this woman, it's easy for us to see and diagnose the battle of control in her life because she's letting it just play out in these over-the-top ways. But I wonder, despite how she's going about it, I wonder if her core desires are not that different than ours. Like if her core desires are really to feel loved, that her core desire is to feel safe within her own life, within her own marriage, and with her home. She wants her kids, her future kids, to be safe. She wants for her life and herself to be deeply known and loved, and she wants to know that she is valued and cared for, and that she is important to her husband. You see, a lot of us are actually losing this battle of control, but we're not even realizing it. We're in a constant fight with controlling things that we cannot control in our lives, and it's the source of a lot of pain and a lot of angst in our lives. And look, we all long for control in our lives, and control in and of itself is not a bad thing. There are certain things in our lives that you do want to take control of. Control over abusive situations or bad situations, and you want to take control of that. But more often than not, what happens is that we become obsessive with this battle of control. And it takes root in our hearts, and it affects our core motivations that are driving us each day. Because we essentially use control as our primary coping mechanism for fear and for pain in our lives. We seek to take control in our own hands, grasping for the things that we think we need, that we think we are going to have in order to protect us and give us the kind of life that we long to have. So we put up all these walls in our life, we map out this perfect plan in that roadmap, and that for anything that can give us a sense of security or a sense of safety, or at the very least keep us from getting hurt. And we all use all kinds of things in this battle of control. I just want to throw out a few. Obviously, first that comes to mind is probably money. So many of us think of money in this battle of control. And money gives us this false sense of security and control because we use money to create a distance in our lives from the troubles and the difficulties of the world. And on some level, it does that a little bit on the front end. We use money as a way of ensuring our future, ensuring the kind of living situations that we want, making sure that we are going to gain and have the kind of life that we are hoping for and that we are believing for ourselves. Many of us don't use money, or maybe we do use money, but we also use power. We use our positions of power, whether that's within our families or within our workplaces. That way, it's a chance for us to have some kind of control because we have influence over other individuals. We have influence over circumstances. Some of us use our bodies and our sexuality, knowing that we can use that to gain attention, to create attachments to ourselves for love and for desires. That is a form of control. Some of us just simply use humor. We'll make jokes about our weight or make jokes about our appearance before somebody else does as a way of controlling those painful words and thoughts and how they may come at us. Some of us use guilt. And when we're using guilt, what we're doing is we're counting on other people's sense of obligation or even other people's loyalty, which is a good thing, as a way of preying on their conscience to try and control the situation. And some just use our words. Some of us are really good at adjusting perception with the words of any given situation so we have control over the view of ourselves or what that situation looks like. See, we all fall into this battle of control, and we use countless tools to seek to protect ourselves from pain. From new pains or from pains of the past that we don't want to creep up again. And so we carry this sense of fear deep down. We carry the sense that we have these future deep longings that we are wanting to have a say on how it all plays out in our life. We want to have a say in that, and we're seeking to control it. However, the problem with this is that we often go too far in this battle of control, and we stop trusting God, and we find that we're putting our trust in ourselves. We essentially find ourselves playing God, or trying to be like God, or at the very least we find ourselves trying to control God. So whether you're trying to control God, whether you're trying to play God, you are falling into this trap. You're falling into this trap of the battle of control. You try and play all your cards just right. You're trying to do all the right things at just the right time, trying to be the masters of your own universe. And before you know it, you're essentially, through your fear and worry, praying prayers like this: Father, your will be done. Your kingdom come. Yes, I agree with that. But actually, my will be done. Like, your kingdom can come, but my will be done. And in this battle is at the crux of our faith, which is why I think it's so important this morning, because at the center of what it means to surrender the leading of our life over to God. Are we going to surrender the leading of our life over to God? That question is at the crux of our faith. Are we going to choose to love and follow Him? At our core, are we going to choose to love and follow Him? Or are we going to be the masters of our own universe? Masters of our own destiny? And this idea of falling into the battle of control can be so damaging for us because it limits our faith. And ironically, it leads us to the opposite kind of life that we're controlling and trying to get for ourselves. It actually leads us to a life of angst and failure and stress, not a life of freedom, which is what we are hoping for by trying to control it. And look, all humans from all history, we're all in this together. It's a constant battle from the earliest temptation of Adam and Eve in the garden in their attempt to be God instead of their willingness to listen to God and His plans for their life. So you may say, as I'm saying this, like, okay, look, I'm definitely not trying to be God. I know I have my issues, but I know I'm not perfect. I'm not trying to be God. But I just want to share an interesting take with us on this. There's a New Testament scholar named Scott McKnight, I believe out of Chicago right now. And for years, he taught a class on Jesus. And what he did in this class is, as the class began each semester, he would give 2 surveys. And the first survey he would give to the students, and it was about the students. And he would say, what do they like? What do they dislike? What do they believe in, et cetera? It'd have those kinds of questions. And then the second survey he would give would be the exact same set of questions, but about God. And what he found was that 90% of the time, the answers given on the surveys were exactly the same. The people's view of themselves and their view of God was almost exactly the same. John Mark Comer reflected on this by saying this: that's telling, isn't it? Here's how you know if you've created God in your own image. He agrees with you on everything. He hates all the people you hate. He voted for the person you voted for. If you're a Republican, so is he. If you're a Democrat, she is too. If you are passionate about blank, then God is passionate about blank. If you're open and elastic about sexuality, so is he. And above all, he's tame. You never get mad at him or blown away by him or scared of him because he's controllable. So my first question would be, is your God controllable? Have you maybe slipped into the trap of forming God into your own image? John Mark goes on to say, maybe the truth is that we want a God who is controllable because we want to be God. We want to be the authority on who God is or isn't and what's right or wrong. But we want the mask of religion or spirituality to cover up the I want to be God reality. Is your life built around seeking after the will of God? Or is your life built around trying to discern how God's will fits into yours? It's a challenging question for all of us, but I believe worthwhile for us to dig into and confront personally. Now, attempting to be God or be like God also plays out by our tendency to control God. And here are a few perspectives from the book The Burden is Light and also the book With. First, The Burden is Light. John Tyson says, seeking to control God and thus narrate the details of our own story, it cuts at the heart of our faith. Christianity is not primarily a plan of protection against the brokenness of the world, but a relationship with Christ in the midst of it. When we confuse those two, we end up using God as a kind of genie to ward off existential angst. So you see, basically what he's saying is when we're functioning out of fear, and when we seek to control, we're limiting Christianity to basically a protection plan. We want to use it as we see fit to gain the kind of life that we expect that we should have. Skye Jethani in the book of With says this, so much of contemporary religion is focused on God's gift rather than on God. We use God as a means of building or repairing our families. We use him as a sex therapist. He's our political advisor and our financial planner. From God's hand, we seek family, sex, power, and wealth. But do we actually want God himself? Again, so challenging. This cuts to the heart of our motivations as humans. It cuts to the heart of our worldview and how we are looking at the life ahead of us. Who is the main character in our story? And I want to point us today to a cautionary tale in the Bible about losing this battle of control. And I want to do it by looking in particular at King Saul. He was the first king of Israel. He was a man of really great gifting. But he's a man that fell prey to this battle of control and comparison, and it led to his demise. Now, his entire journey, I would say, is actually a really worthwhile case study. You can pick that up in 1 Samuel. I believe it starts around chapter 9. And it's a great case study, especially about this battle of control and how we allow it to let us fall into areas of jealousy, manipulation, disobedience, fear. But for this morning, just to kind of skip along, I'm going to point out just a few areas to help highlight our understanding. And so the first place I want to jump to is this pivotal point in his life where he starts to take a downward spiral, and it takes place when he does something that we all tend to do, which is that he does not trust in God's timing. He loses his trust in God's timing. So it starts in 1 Samuel 13, and we see this moment where the enemies of Israel are preparing to attack. It's the Philistines. And we see in verse 5 that they've gathered 3,000 chariots, 6,000 charioteers, soldiers, they said, as numerous as the sand on the seashore. So we're talking about a legitimate threat now that is forming up against Israel. And Saul, as the king, now needs to prepare his troops for battle. He needs to prepare to protect and to fight and to take action. However, Saul was told not to enter into battle until the prophet Samuel comes to offer a sacrifice first. But as time was progressing, Samuel was not coming. So the threat of the enemy is rising, and Saul's men are beginning to get very worried. They're panicking. Some of them are now starting to leave. And so Saul is caught in this moment of tension, a moment that we all know so well, I think. Do we continue to trust in God's timing, or do we take matters into our own hands? And what we see in this story, unfortunately, is that Saul was unwilling to live in that tension. His vision and his ideas for success and for how it should be played out superseded his obedience in this moment. Did you catch that? His vision, the way he thought success should play out for him, superseded his obedience to God and what he knew God had called him to. And so he takes on the role as priest, something he knew he should not do, and he offers the sacrifice himself. But I want to take this one step deeper because this is really complex and interesting. You see, the sacrifice that Saul offered then in that moment, when he took it on himself, was centered on receiving God's blessing for the battle. So it's not like Saul was trying to do it without God. That's why I think this is so fascinating and convicting for me. Because his desire to control the situation, at least in his own mind, was not an overt rebellion against God. No, his sin was that Saul was trying to control God. He wanted the blessing of God, but he wanted it his own way and in his own timing. How often do we fall into that trap? We want the blessing of God, but we want it in our own way. Andrew Murray comments on it. He says, "We find the Christian life so difficult because we seek for God's blessing while we live in our own will." So when we're doing that, what we're doing is we're corrupting God's will. We're tainting God's will. We're trying to bend his will to fit ours. We're putting ourselves in the God seat. And when we actually do that, that leads us to a life of less freedom, not more freedom. It leads us to a life of slavery. I just want to give a few examples on perhaps how we've been seeing that play out in our lives. So maybe you've done that with finances, seeking to control or stretch in a way that you knew you shouldn't. You wanted a certain kind of life, or you had a vision for a certain kind of situation, or there was these tensions, these enemies rising that you knew it was coming, but the finances were not there. And so you end up finding yourself taking matters into your own hand, and you find yourself making the wrong decision, enslaved to credit card charges and debt that do not bring you more freedom, but bring you less. Maybe you do this even with your spirituality, not relying on the timing and the promises of God for your life. And so you start to get uneasy and you start to get disheartened. And so you switch churches, or you give up on your spiritual disciplines, or you feel like you need to make some kind of change, so you move neighborhoods or you move cities, trying to expedite your vision for what God has for your life. Or maybe you're tempted to do this in your relationships, not trusting God's will in God's way, and you get worried that you're never going to find a spouse. And so you venture onto dating apps and start meeting up with people that you know are not equally yoked to you. Or you step into physical situations trying to seal the deal in an attempt to expedite a sense of unity and closeness. See, these decisions only complicate our lives all the more. And this is what happened to Saul in this situation. Seeking to control the way of God, he did not receive blessing, but he received judgment. You see, just as Saul was finishing the offering, Samuel arrived. Pick up with me in verse 11 as we read. "What have you done?" asked Samuel. Saul replied, "When I saw that the men were scattering, and that you did not come at the set time, and that the Philistines were assembling at Michmash, I thought, now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal, and I have not sought the Lord's favor. So I felt compelled to offer the burnt offering." "You have done a foolish thing," Samuel said. "You have not kept the command the Lord your God gave you. If you had, he would have established your kingdom over Israel for all time. But now your kingdom will not endure. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart and appointed him ruler of his people, because you have not kept the Lord's command." This is the beginning of the end for Saul. And it spurs on a series of events in which he chooses to manipulate, to justify his actions going forward, and to allow his fear and allow his insecurities in leadership and in life to rule the future of his life. What if Saul would have waited? I mean, what if he would have trusted that God is the one that anointed him? God is the one that called him and appointed him as king over Israel, and that God would not leave him, and that God would accomplish the good work that he had for him and for Israel. There's an old saying that I think fits here where it says, "The brave man's not braver than any other, but simply braver for 10 minutes longer." I often think about that saying with Saul, in particular with this story, when Samuel was just right around the corner. But see, what we see in Saul is that it was not just a matter of this one moment of disobedience, but rather a lifestyle of control, as opposed to a lifestyle of surrender. See, this lifestyle of control continued to grow in Saul. We see it in how he treated David. As David grew in skill, as David grew in popularity and favor with the people, he also grew as a military leader. And Saul could not contain his jealousy and his insecurity. So this drives Saul to turn to violence. It drives Saul to lose a relationship with his own son. He turns all his attentions and his energies that he should be giving to the kingdom into leading to now trying to just destroy David. He's trying to control his leadership. He's trying to control David. He's trying to control the plan of God. William Booth, the founder of the Salvation Army, said, "The greatness of a man's power is the measure of his surrender." This is something Saul, despite all of his giftings, and maybe primarily because he had all these giftings, something he was never able to do. Never able to understand that the greatness of a man's power is the measure of his surrender. There's a Barna study that came out that showed that 91% of US adults say the best way to find yourself is by looking within yourself. But also what's staggering is that 76% of practicing Christians say the same thing. But what Jesus says, and he reveals to us, is that truth is not found within the self, but through surrender to Jesus. And surrender is not the same as momentary obedience. So I want to make that point as well. Saul's downfall was not simply because he was disobedient in that one moment before the battle. Obedience is a moment. It's a moment of willpower or a decision. And that weak moment for Saul is a sin that he would have to deal with for the rest of his life. But the problem continued for Saul because he refused to surrender control of his life over to God. Surrender is a lifestyle. Surrender is a posture that we take. And true surrender is the key to winning this battle of control. And I believe this posture of surrender that leads to success and winning in regard to the battle of control, if we're talking about how do we win this battle, I think it's given to us largely in the Beatitudes in particular, and demonstrated through the posture of meekness in the greatest way. You see, the battle of control is what we find ourselves caught up in all the time when we are basically trying to inherit the earth in our own power. However, in terms of inheriting the earth, Jesus says, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." It's the only autobiographical description of his own personality, meekness, from Jesus. In Matthew 11, he says this, "I am meek and lowly in heart." It's the only time he actually gives a personality reference of himself. We read in Numbers that Moses, you know him, the man chosen to lead the people of God out of slavery from Pharaoh. He parted the Red Sea. He led the Israelites through the desert. He basically did a seemingly impossible task that was filled with countless unknowns before him. Circumstances that were completely beyond his control, circumstances that were completely beyond his power. According to Scripture, he was considered not just a great leader, but the most humble and meek man on the face of the earth. So if this is the case, if it's the meek who will inherit the earth, what exactly is this meekness? Meekness is often misinterpreted as weakness or mildness, but it actually comes from the Greek word that's translated as praus, which actually is a word to describe a powerful stallion that is broken and able to be ridden. A stallion that has been broken and now able to be ridden. Meekness basically then is strength under control. So picture that in your mind, right? You're picturing a wild horse versus a horse that is trained up now. And that wild horse may think that is better off running in his own power, doing whatever he wants. We may think we are better off running in our own power, having control on what we do, doing whatever we want. However, the truth is it's the broken and the trained up horse that's asked to lead the parades. It's the trainable and self-disciplined horse that's chosen to run in those great races. And it's the brave and the meek stallion that's taken into war and trusted to carry kings into battle. You see, the key to winning this battle of control and experiencing the freedom of Christ in your life is to surrender your will to his. Though as we see in this picture of meekness, this is not a passive and a weak move, right? So there's that common phrase that we always hear where you just got to let go and let God. And I don't think that is correct. It's not let go and just let God. It's let go and trust God. It's let go and listen to God. It's let go and be formed by God. It's let go and allow yourself to be used by God. See, letting go is an act of trust. Henry Nouwen famously talks about this idea of letting go by using an example of when he was learning to fly on a trapeze. And when you do the trapeze, there's two roles, right? There's the flyer and there's the catcher. And see, for the flyer to have any measure of success, he has to have complete control and complete trust in the catcher. So as the flyer is going through the air, there comes that moment where they have to let go. And they can't control it and they can't force it. They have to trust in his timing and with outstretched arms, let go. And now at some point, we all let go. We have to relinquish control. We leap for something that we deem will give us security. We leap for something that we are trusting will catch us and give us hope. And so the other question is, who is your catcher? Who are you trusting? And what are you leaping for? I want to quote from With one more time as we move toward closing. says, but surrender is only possible if we have total assurance that we are safe. We must be convinced that if we let go, we will be caught. This assurance only comes when we trust that our Heavenly Father desires to be with us and will not let us fall. Do you have assurance that your Father will not let you fall? Or maybe perhaps you feel like you had that once, but it's faded, or you want to believe it, but you're not quite sure. And as you experience the fears of life and the threats of insecurity as they come flying at you, you found yourself settling for a life that's actually minimizing the work of God as you attempt to be your own master. And you realize you're only living a life as big as yourself. That you're living a life and hoping and controlling and fighting for a vision that's only as big as the vision that you can comprehend. But maybe there's something in your heart that's calling you to a life of God. Because true freedom is found in surrender. Life without surrender to Christ leads you to living a reactionary life. So when you're losing this battle of control, you are being driven by fear. You are responding to those fears. You are living a reactionary life, always responding and reacting to whatever those fears that are popping up to you in your life. And when you're losing that battle of control and that fear is driving you, you start to make justifications. You make justifications for your wrongdoings. You actually start to make justifications for sin because your plan now in your life has become an ultimate for you. Saul fell into that trap. He fell into that idea that the ends justify the means. But as we see in his story, and as we know and see in so many of our stories, that the ends do not justify the means. Those decisions lead to more brokenness and less freedom. So taking another drink or clicking next episode to numb the pain and the loneliness actually leads to less freedom. Dating the wrong person or retreating to pornography actually leads to less freedom. Manipulating your job and your coworkers, having anxiety attacks about your career leads to less freedom. Obsessing over your body or your retirement plan and how that's going to work out leads to less freedom. So where are you putting your trust? Who's our catcher this morning? And are we carrying fear of letting go? Are you caught up in the battle of control? Because God does not give you a spirit of fear. And yet time and again, we find ourselves allowing fear to win the day in our lives. And it leads us to control. Fear of not having enough. Fear of where our kids will go to school. Fear of never finding a soulmate. Fear that our loved ones are going to get sick. Fear that we're never going to find actual true purpose in our work. That we'll never actually find true validity in our status. Fear of being left out or fear of being rejected. St. Ignatius of Loyola said that sin is an unwillingness to trust that what God wants is our deepest happiness. Do you trust that what God wants for your life is your deepest happiness? Or are you finding yourself this morning trapped by the oldest sin in human history? The myth that you can control your own happiness and that you know best. See, it's not just about believing in God. Adam and Eve believed in God. They actually walked with him daily. But the enemy deceived them into doubting that God was trustworthy. That's why they took the apple. He deceived them into believing that his way was the right way. They believed in God, but they didn't exercise their trust in God. See, our lack of trust leads us to try and control our lives and try and control God. And when we try and control God, we think we're winning. But we're actually minimizing the work of God in our life and trapping ourselves under the tyranny of control. I believe Jesus is calling us as a church to let go. I believe Jesus is calling many of you this morning to trust in his timing. In your own way, to be a flyer in the air that with outstretched hands can trust that he will catch you.